just getting in some squats as we're about to talk all about the squat movement. And the squat is one of the 8 fundamental movements, but it's also probably the most important action that you should be able to do. And the importance of this is anything from going down to pick up something heavy, just sitting down, or in other cultures, it's very important to be able to squat to use the bathroom. And when you squat properly, there should be a series of events that allow you to load through the glute and the hamstring. So oftentimes, and this would be a great thing to practice here right now too, if you squat, and this is how I used to squat, and it was so bad that as I would squat down, I couldn't maintain an upright position, so my body would lean forward and I would essentially come up onto my toes. My whole body would shift forward, and if you're trying to pick up something heavy, putting your center of mass forward on your toes, it's not a healthy way to lift because it loads your spine, it loads the anterior quad, and then it puts you forward away from your main pivot points. So when you're squatting, the things that I want you to think about, and we're going to talk about this in 3 planes of motion, the main criteria, I'm going to do this from the side. As I squat down, I want to see that we can get to 90 degrees here. I want to make sure that as I'm sitting back into that movement, I'm loading the glutes and the hamstrings. If I go forward onto my toes, I feel the work coming from here going into here. So it becomes a much more quad-driven movement. Additionally, as I go forward into that position, I feel the weight go from the ball of my foot onto the toes. As I said earlier, that forward shift does not give you a solid base to move from. So the number one thing that I think about when watching people squat is where are they sending that weight? There's a popular thing on social media talking about glute amnesia, meaning the glutes don't work. And in a squat movement, if I squat and I kind of round my back like this, I have no energy here to use my glute. I have no potential energy. If I can get my hips back into position, maintain an upright spine, then that's going to allow me to load into the posterior chain and use the glute hamstring. So when we talk about form on a squat, you got to send the weight back into your hips because that loads the posterior chain. Now, what are the requirements of that? In order to get down into a squat, I need to maintain an upright position of the chest. And that upright position is relative extension of the spine. And so oftentimes people will first, if we sit like this throughout the day, our back is rounded into flexion. And to go down into a squat, if I'm trying to go there, I need to be able to go here. And that is relative extension of the spine. So with all my clients, when I'm working on the squat, I need to make sure that they can extend or back bend through their spine. And if not, they're going to feel it in their back. It's going to be lumbar compression. Now, that doesn't cause pain right away, but when you load the facets like that, it takes away the mechanical advantage in the glutes. So I need to make sure that they can maintain upright position of the spine. So that includes extension through the low back and mobility through the thoracic spine. Next thing is I need to make sure that the hips can load into flexion. So we just talked about the spine being able to be upright, but next, can the hips, here's neutral, can they flex down while maintaining the spine upright? Third is, can the knees flex? And then lastly, can the ankles move into dorsiflexion? Yes, we need all those things to happen at the same time, which makes the squat considered a complex movement. So, in review, there's a lot of questions over stance on the squat too. So should the toes be all the way forward? Well, the toes can be pointed forward, but as the toes point forward, that's going to draw you into internal rotation. And internal rotation is a more narrow position of the hip joints. So if you're going into internal rotation, that's fine, but you just need to make sure that you have that available range of motion. Oftentimes, if I'm starting forward like this, I hit that end range earlier because I'm putting the hip in that femoral acetabular impingement position. Now, it's not bad as long as the person can still sit back. But what I'll often cue is tell people to go where is most comfortable. And for most people, that's a slight turnout or a slight opening of the feet. For me, it's about 20 degrees. That allows my hips and pelvis to open up, and then I can send my hips back a lot easier. So that hip stance position, I say a slight turnout of the foot, and then what I'm looking for as I go down is subtalar joint, knee, and hips all in line. When I say subtalar joint, I want that to be in neutral, meaning my knee is going to be tracking in line with my second and third toe, all the way in line with the hips. What that looks like is that slight turnout of the feet. As I drop down, I have in line second and third toe up into position in the hips. What you'll see oftentimes, people who are weak in the glutes and can't sit backwards, is that as they go down, the legs will start to collapse in to what looks like a valgusing posture. When you valgus, it internally rotates the femurs, and that internal rotation is not the action of the glutes. So we lose power or we lose potential energy. So I want that hip, knee, and ankle alignment as well as an upright spine. So different variations of a squat that I want to talk about are going to be a front squat, which is also known as a goblet squat, and then the traditional back squat. When we do a back squat, picture the weight here. It's going to load the spine more posteriorly. That action has the potential to create more strain through the lower back if someone's mechanics aren't proper. So oftentimes I'll start with people in more of a front squat or goblet squat position because it allows them to shift their weight forward and it helps correct the body. I'm holding the thing here because I do it with a kettlebell, but if the weight's there, it loads forward a little bit, which then allows me to drop down. If the weight's here, I'm pushing that way, which, as I said earlier, just can lead to the potential of increased strain to the lower back. Both are good. I train both of them in my own life with clients, especially those who are in pain. I often start with a front squat, and then I'll progress sort of into back squatting movements. So the last part of this video is I want to talk about how to train the squat for someone whose mechanics aren't quite there. And we need to look at this as a whole body movement. So we talked about the spinal position, and then we talked about the requirements in the lower extremity. If we're doing an overhead squat, we'd also need to add in the criteria of the lats and the upper extremity, but we're not going there today. So first thing is the person needs to maintain that upright spine. And how I work on this, or one way to work on thoracic extension, is to have the foam roller or something across their middle back and arch back over it and back down. Over it and back down. You can also put their feet up on a wall and then work on that same thing. So you're mimicking the mechanics of the squat while forcing their spine into that upright position. It's a great way to start training the spine, teaching it how to stay upright as the hips are going into flexion. Next thing is training spinal extension. And we just worked on thoracic, but lumbar spine extension is necessary as you drop down into the squat. So for that, I'll have them go, I'll show it forward initially, toes forward, hands on your hips, core in, and then press all the way backwards. I feel the core working, I get a stretch through here, and I send the hips and pelvis forward. It looks kind of like a funny movement, but it allows you to achieve opening on the front without the spine feeling a compressive force. And we're trying to mitigate that, because if you're feeling compression in your spine as you go down into a squat, it's going to inhibit how well your glutes can work. And if your glutes aren't driving the movement, then you're just losing a ton of power, and I would say you should be reworking that. So thoracic spine, lumbar spine, and then now we need to practice hips going into flexion. One way that I like to do that is to go into quadruped or all fours. I'll put a stick on the low back, and then I'll practice dropping down while sending my hips back, and then back up. dropping down and back up. The stick route there, using a dowel on the low back, it teaches the client how to drive their hips back, load into the glute area without the low back rounding into flexion. So you're maintaining that neutral position, teaching how to load the hips into flexion without losing the spine position. If that's too challenging, I'll work on both knees to chest. So I'll have the client pull their knees up towards their chest and work on getting a stretch through the glute hamstring area. So I'm pulling up. In yoga, this is called happy baby. So you can even grab here and pull through there. I'll do both legs because I'm trying to mimic the requirements of the squat. Each time, locking the tailbone or the sacrum down onto the table, pulling both knees up towards the chest, and feeling that tension in the glute and hamstring. If the person, as they pull their knees up, if they just round through their low back, you're missing the point of the exercise. As you pull your knees up, you need to make sure that you're loading the posterior chain. We do it here on your back, then we do it in quadruped, then we do it in standing. That ABC approach, it teaches them how to feel and load tension, and then you gradually increase the requirements of the movement. Last part of this is going to be ankle mobility. So we talked before about the position of the foot and ankles, either being here, which turns the hips in, there turns the hips out a little bit. But from that side view, if you don't have ankle mobility, as you drop down, you're going to go forward on your toes and your heels are going to rise up. You should try that a few times and you'll immediately feel the tension go from the glute hamstring into the front of the knees and the quads. Now that's not bad, but if you're looking for the most powerful, most efficient strategy, it's going to be sending your butt back and loading through your hips. So the way that I train ankle mobility, and we got to think about this in relation to the squat. So in the squat, the hip is going into flexion, the knee is flexing, and the ankle's dorsiflexing. So if you're just training ankle dorsiflexion like this against the wall with the knee straight, then you're missing that whole component of the functional significance of the squat. So I'll do it with, I'll go into more like a soleus or one joint ankle dorsiflexors. I'll drop forward, the hip is going into flexion, knee is flexing as the ankle dorsiflexes. With that, I feel a low calf stretch through here, wrapping around into the plantar fascia. I'll work that movement through different planes of movement, driving the knee out, driving the knee in. So I'm practicing what it feels like to load the talocrural joint through different motions of subtalar joint motion, because as I work on that, then as I go down and do a squat, my ankle has been there and it knows how to perform that movement. The last thing I'll say for this squat video is that we've broken it down, we've looked at the spine, we've looked at the hips, knees, and ankles, but lastly, we need to perform the movement all together, and that's a complex functional motion. For that to occur, there needs to be some motor planning, or there needs to be some preparation from the nervous system. So we've done all of those subcomponents. The thing that we need to do now is put it together, and a great way to do that is by using a TRX or using some sort of assistance. So then as you lower down, if I'm holding on here, it gives me some assistance on how to maintain all those proper requirements, then as I come back up. By giving yourself that assistance, it allows your nervous system to understand how to program it without the load being so intense that it can't pattern it all. So using TRX or using some sort of assistance is a great way to sort of trick the body into understanding how to perform the movement. So that is all about the squat, the functional significance, the form of the squat, different variations of front and back squat, and then how to train or how to break down the movement of the squat so we can build it back up and do it in a pain-free manner.